Business Development Manager, Amber and BGA, and Professor Philip McLaughlin, Amber and BGA Accreditation Board Member. In a moment, I'll pass over to Victor, who will begin the session with his presentation. And following Victor's presentation, we'll move to Philip, who will be able to discuss more around BGA accreditation. The session will close with a Q&A section at the end. So if you have any questions throughout this session, please type them into the question tab, and we hopefully get time to answer all of them at the end. For any unanswered questions, don't worry. Victor has agreed to follow up with you after the session. So without further ado, I'll now pass over to Victor.
Thank you very much, Paul. I appreciate that. And good afternoon from London. Again, welcome to today's accreditation workshop. I'm, as was mentioned, the Business Development Manager for AMBA and BGA, and I've been with AMBA now for almost 5 years. So this is where my role is where I support business schools in joining BGA and progressing them through their journey to achieve BGA membership and eventually accreditation. And as was mentioned, alongside myself, Professor Philip McLaughlin, who has vast amount of experience in conducting accreditations, will be presenting shortly after myself on more of the aspects of mentorship and as well as preparing for the assessment visits. So today's workshop is really ideal for any business school considering undergoing BGA accreditation and who wants to seek a better understanding of the process and the required documentation. So what I'm going to do is run through the steps and the documentation needed, and then we'll hand off to Philip. So let's get started. Now, if you're considering BGA accreditation at this point, there are a couple of useful items you should be made aware of to understand the basic philosophy of this accreditation process. BGA is an impact-driven institutional accreditation with focus on elements such as responsible management and lifelong learning. And it emphasizes heavily on the school's ability to measure and track its ability to meet its key strategic objectives. And we don't believe in being prescriptive and forcing schools to comply with some sort of a prescriptive criteria, as we want to see the industry to innovate at a much faster pace than it currently is and to differentiate itself more. And the accreditation that is prescriptive in nature will not really help accomplish that goal. So instead, we focus on the outcome of the school's initiatives and actions to gain an understanding of its ability to meet those objectives and then support it by offering consultative assessments. Now let's look at the eligibility. BGA has 5 eligibility criteria that schools must meet before they can apply. So these are in order. The school must be a member of BGA. Secondly, the business school must possess degree awarding powers. Third, this business school must have been graduating at least 3 student cohorts from one of its degree programs. 4, the business school must have audited financial statements that prove it's financially sustainable in the long term. And if the school meets these criteria, it will be able to apply towards BGA accreditation. Now, preparing for a accreditation. Before beginning the accreditation, the school is highly encouraged to have a discussion with one of its BGA accreditation directors. We usually have 4 BGA accreditation managers, you could say, or accreditation directors responsible for various regions. And if your school is coming for a certain region, you will be paired with that respective accreditation director. And the accreditation director will be able to provide recommendations as well as feedback on the expectations of the school and go through the accreditation criteria with the school more thoroughly. The accreditation director will also be able to answer any questions you may have pertaining to the criteria or the process, ensuring you have as much understanding of it as possible. Now, schools will also need to review 2 documents prior to the beginning of the accreditation process. So from left to right, you have here the BGA accreditation criteria, and secondly, you have the BGA accreditation guidance. Now, let's first take a look at the criteria. There are, let's say, 5 main principles or areas that we look at when we do an accreditation for schools. The first one is the institution. Second is faculty. Third is students. Fourth is programs. And 5 is impact. So what kind of areas or things do we look at under these things? Well, under institution, for instance, we'd look at mission, vision, the strategy, the leadership and governance, any continuous improvement, and the general diversity and take on diversity at the school, responsible management policies and principles, what type of resources the school has and available, and how it's planning to gain more resources in the future. Under faculty, we want to see something like the overall strategy for the faculty, the research, scholarship, and teaching. Again, looking at diversity and very much at cognitive diversity and seeing, do you have people from different fields who can really contribute a lot of value to your students? And under students themselves, we want to see how you market to the students, and like if you understand your core, say, markets. We look at the recruitment methods you use, again, diversity. And under programs, that's where we go into a lot of detail with regards to kind of like the level and the design, the curriculum, the student feedback, obviously, is very important to look at. The learning outcomes, how you innovate those programs, how you do assessments, the internal feedback and overall delivery, and the, let's say, embedment of responsible management. And finally, in the impact area, we really want to see something within careers, how you deal with alumni, and then how you actually provide value to not only your stakeholders, but beyond that. So make sure you familiarize yourself with the principles and the subsections so that you really understand what is expected of the school under each section. So in this example, you can see what BGA would like to see from a school under an area such as scholarship, research, and teaching. Now, the second document you should read through carefully is the BGA Accreditation Guidance. And everything from the core principles of BGA Accreditation and what it's really about to the process, the actual visit agenda, who sits on the accreditation board, the general timeframes, and eventually, of course, the timescales and outcomes and what you can expect between each stage. Everything of that nature is in this document. It's a bit of a long read, of course, but any questions you may have will likely be found in this document. So where can you access this? Well, you just head onto our website, go to business schools, head over to accreditation, and what you'll find when you press the apply for or BGA accreditation, you'll find all the documents there, and you can just download them individually. You can also see the list of the assessors we make use of and download any application forms as well. So you can find everything on the website. Now, let's take a look at the process. The accreditation process consists of 3 separate stages. The first one is the application stage. Secondly, the development stage. And finally, the assessment stage. Now, each stage is designed to only allow schools to progress if they're ready to do so. So with reviews being made at each stage by the BGA Accreditation Board and the BGA Accreditation Directors. Now, first, the application stage requires business schools to complete 3 separate documents. These are the accreditation application form, the standard assessment costs, and finally, the letter of intent. First one is the accreditation application form. This is a 12-page document that requires schools to provide information on its current strategy and objectives, the organization charts, any recent investments, strategic partnerships, policies on responsible management, the use of faculty, what type of faculty and practitioners you use, and any relevant research output if you have research. The full list of programs as well offered by the school, including certificate and degree programs, career provisions, current alumni support, and lastly, where the school has, if the school has any impact metrics developed. Not necessary, but it's a good way for us to see if the school has made any progress in this area. The second document is the standard assessment cost, and this is very simply a simple breakdown of all the fees involved in the accreditation process. Everything from what you can expect in the application stage and assessment stage fees to the final panel expenses and cancellation fees, everything is covered in here. And we require that the business school's dean sign this form. And lastly, we have the letter of intent. Short and sweet, though incredibly important, as this is where the school's dean will acknowledge that they understand the accreditation process, its criteria, the fees involved, and that we require essentially full transparency and honesty during this full process. And remember, we want to be able to help institutions, and we won't be able to do that if we receive false information during the accreditation process. So always, always, always stick to the facts and be 100% honest in all your reporting. Now, once all these documents have been signed, you can submit them to your accreditation director and the BGA Accreditation inbox, which is the email you see here, accreditation@businessgraduatesassociation.com. And it can take up to 4 weeks for the accreditation team to review the submitted materials. In some cases, the accreditation team may ask the school to further clarify aspects of their submission if needed. If all seems to be in order though, and the accreditation team has no outstanding questions regarding the application, the school will be able to progress towards the next stage of the accreditation process. And this is of course the development stage. And the development stage is primarily focused on supporting schools map their positive impact on stakeholders. And to do this, we utilize something called the continuous impact model, or shortened as CIM, to help schools develop a thorough understanding of their impact. What's key to note here is that the impact metrics that a business school will need to develop will relate to its own key strategic objectives. It won't be metrics that can just fall in from anywhere of the institution or so forth. These metrics have to relate directly to the objectives and the overall mission of the school. What is the school trying to accomplish? And then it's the school's way to prove that it's meeting those objectives, and our way to kind of glimpse and see, is the school actually able to do that and meet their own objectives? And so let's think of an example. An example would be a business school, say situated in a region in need of entrepreneurs. And the school may have a strategic objective to train a new generation of entrepreneurs who can solve pressing business needs in the region. And in this case, the school would need to develop a metric that directly assesses their success in training students to be adequately prepared in launching a business. And this can be demonstrated, for instance, by tracking how many of those graduates actually end up launching a business. A simple example, but again, it hopefully illustrates the point of what schools are trying to do with using the CIM. Now, in this stage, the business school will be paired with an independent academic mentor who will be able to guide the school in defining its objectives further and lend support on the creation of the impact metrics. Philip will be providing further information on this area after my slides. Now, a key document schools should study at this stage, again, is the Continuous Impact Model Overview. This too can be accessed on the BGA website, and it provides a full breakdown of the dimensions to the continuous impact model, as well as example metrics. The dimensions include intent, graduate achievement, value creation, scholarship, ecosystem, and society. Now, schools are not required to address each dimension fully. The dimensions serve as, say, core areas where a school can evaluate where they are the strongest and in turn the weakest. The school's strategic objectives, for instance, may be delivering lots of value under the dimension of scholarship and ecosystem, but it perhaps may be lacking in, say, society or graduate achievement. But again, it's a good way to kind of see where your school is the strongest and perhaps where some areas may need to be improved upon. Next, a framework we encourage schools to use when developing their impact metrics is the following displayed here: input, activity, output, outcome, and finally, impact. Let's try to break down these a little bit more into further detail. So first we have input, and this is basically the investment made on the institution's part of achieving the desired target. And this doesn't necessarily have to be a financial figure. Second, we have activity, basically the actions taken with a given input. Third, we've got output, and this is the direct, tangible result from that activity. Then we have outcome, which is the change as a result from input and activity. And finally, impact. Outcomes as a direct result of the undertaken input and activity minus outcomes that would have been achieved without the input or undertaken activity. Impact also includes outcomes that have far more reaching consequences. So let's look at an example here. I've used this example in previous presentations, but hopefully you can see here what an impact metric could look like. So we have the dimension here of value creation that we're looking at, and the metric we're looking at is graduate startup success. So again, going back to the example of a school that perhaps wants to be a center or a school leading the charge for creating or building up a entrepreneurial generation. And then we use 3 years of data to kind of track what's been happening. And then we look at the inputs. This time we look at, for instance, the faculty budget, and then we see what we do with that budget. So for instance, they've decided to do 4 incubation programs 1 year, but then the more further you go with more money, they've been able to do more incubation programs, offer more expert advisors. Perhaps these expert advisors could be business leaders who have the experience of launching businesses, who come in and then offer the advice, and also a lot of the moral support that you need when launching a business, which of course is needed. And if we look at the output, of course, we look at the kind of awards given and mentors available. And then finally, we have the outcome. And we see that companies have actually started up. More companies have been started by looking at the various input and what we did with that activity. We can actually track and see that more students were actually not only able to start up a company, but had the courage to do so. Because it's one thing to go through a school and gain all the let's say the knowledge of how to do so. But if you don't have, let's say, the guts, perhaps the school could have done something differently. Maybe not, maybe so, but this is a way kind of to demonstrate that. And finally, you look at impact, you can see what these firms eventually did, how many they employed. It doesn't have to go into granular detail, but it's basically a way to see, okay, this school is actually doing something pretty darn well in this region. So it's incredibly important to, once again, note that the metrics relate to the business school's key objectives and that they demonstrate a positive trend. If there's a negative trend, for instance, schools will be asked to provide a description to what the underlying cause may be, such as external or perhaps internal factors that may be preventing them from reaching their desired objectives or targets. Now, it's expected that schools develop between 5 and 10 relevant impact metrics. And once these are completed and the academic mentor is satisfied with the developed material, the school will be asked to submit their metrics to the BGA Accreditation Board. Schools can expect a decision within 4 weeks on whether they are approved and whether they can move on to the next and final stage of the accreditation process. So once a school has received approval to start the assessment stage, they will be given 2 separate forms to fill out. One is the self-assessment form, and the next is the self-audit report. Now, BGA will also ask the school to select 2 sample programs, which will be reviewed more thoroughly. So typically it's recommended that one program is an undergraduate program and the other is a postgraduate program, though if a school doesn't say have undergraduate programs or vice versa, we'll select 2 programs of one level that are as different from each other as possible. And the school will be asked to select one program while BGA selects the second sample program. Now, let's go over the 2 documents I mentioned in more detail. The first one we have here is the self-assessment form, which I mentioned earlier, and this is a data-driven document. Here you can expect to submit data on the programs awarded by the institution, faculty and practitioners and their various experience, student metrics, career statistics for graduates, as well as a more detailed view of the 2 sample programs you've been asked to submit. And this will include, of course, intake numbers, graduations, entry requirements to the program, the learning outcomes and whether they were achieved, delivery methods, core and elective courses, and well, much more, as you probably just saw. So alongside the SAF, it's important that schools include the attached documents in the appendix so that can back up the stated documents, because no doubt the assessment team will want to take a look at, are these numbers actually real, or are they just being found out of, empty space. So next up is the self-audit report. And this is a narrative document which allows the school to tell its story. The SAR template lists all the BGA accreditation criteria with bullets under each criteria explaining what schools should address under each point when writing a report. And so an example, as you see here, under continuous improvement, for instance, we look at things such as outlining any mandatory audit processes and so forth. It's also a good idea for schools to leverage the data in the SAF that they've provided, as well as the impact metrics in the report to strengthen their arguments. And so while working on the reports, the relevant accreditation account manager, who's in charge of your process, will get in touch to arrange the assessment visit. And this will consist of 3 independent panelists, typically deans or former deans of the AMBA and BGA network, and the accreditation account manager themselves. And the school will need to submit both their SAF and SAR documents 3 weeks prior to the assessment visit, which will be conducted over 2 days. Again, Philip will explain a little bit more in detail what you can expect at an assessment. Now, once the assessment visit has been conducted, the school will be informed verbally on whether they have achieved accreditation and for how long their accreditation will last. Now, this is usually up to 5 years that for schools that have really demonstrated they meet the criteria. Somewhere around the 3-year mark if they meet most of the criteria but have a few important aspects to work on. A deferral, basically where a school gets up to a year to work on certain aspects, so they were not awarded accreditation, they'll just have to work on some, let's say, important bits that the assessment team have seen or identified, and they get basically a year to do so, and so the assessment visit is rescheduled. And of course, not awarded accreditation. Usually we only get to this stage if a school has outright lied on any of the documentation, because we can usually identify if a school is compliant or not and is able to prove their impact and so forth in the documentation. So if of course what you write in the document doesn't match the reality, the school will not be awarded accreditation. And luckily this doesn't happen often, so that's a good part. Now, from here, the accreditation account manager will draft the accreditation report containing all the recommendations and conditions the school received at the assessment visit. And we'll send it both to the assessment panel and the business school to review and fact check. So the final leg in the assessment stage is when the business school receives the final assessment report, with all the recommendations to improve the school and its programs and conditions that the school must meet to keep its accreditation. And of course, when the reaccreditation will be. Any concluding remarks and analysis of the 2 sample programs will also be seen in this document. There will also be a section on when your reaccreditation date is. So it'll give you an actual date and what you will have to basically prepare for that next reaccreditation. Now, alongside this, schools actually receive their very own impact report. And now the neat thing about the impact report is that this is a document that provides an overview of all the metrics the school has created and showcases why the school was able to achieve accreditation. And this gives stakeholders further transparency as to the qualities of the school and the objectives it was able to meet when running through the accreditation process. And this can be proudly published on the school's website and communicated through marketing channels. But basically, no other accreditation body does this. Typically, you don't know why a school is accredited. You just know that, yes, they have accreditation, great. But the impact report is basically meant to offer an even further level of transparency where stakeholders can see why the school became accredited without giving any sensitive data out, of course, and give them an understanding for what the school is really good at. And so you can find everything that I've mentioned related to the accreditation process alongside all documents, application forms, and fees on our website. So just head on to the link that I provided here. And that's it. That's the breakdown of the full accreditation process in terms of steps and documentation. So if you have any further questions about this, do feel free to get in touch with me or just submit your questions at the Q&A after Philip's presentation. My contact details are here on the slide as well. But one of the most important aspects to accreditation now, namely the mentorship and the assessment visit itself, will now be covered by Philip. So over to you now, Philip.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, let me say welcome to you all. It's a great pleasure to be with you. Unfortunately, I can't see you, so I don't know how you react. Just one piece of advice. If you have any difficult questions, send them to Victor. He's probably a lot more competent than I am to answer them. And he's probably more active than I am. So it's a great pleasure for me. And I've noticed the people who are participating, we have a full range of people, from people assuring planning and quality assurance, people ensuring international relations and quality assurance, people assuring the activity of strategic initiatives, and we even have one accreditation specialist, which is quite nice. I probably wouldn't consider myself to be an accreditation specialist, and I would urge you from the outset, a good mentor is a mentor who basically tries to forget what she has seen before, to bring a fresh look and a fresh way of analyzing what the schools tell us. And I always say that my role as a mentor and also as an accreditor is to come with the enthusiasm, to listen to the stories being told by schools, and to try and help those schools to make their stories more coherent, more dynamic, and more embedded in facts. I think that is really very, very important. If you look at the slogan, the motto of the BGA, it's something like, leaders never stop learning. Well, to be honest, mentors never stop learning. If a mentor does this type of job, then she probably does it to learn. I think I've never done a mentoring project without coming away feeling wiser, more enriched, more respectful, more reactive. So, please be, from the outset, please be aware that the mentorship role is a mirror role. If you give the mentor respect, if you give the mentor truth, if you give the mentor, show the mentor that you're enthusiastic and you're trying to do a good job, then the mentor will react to you. You've got to sort of build a relationship with the mentor. I remember when I first started many years ago, and I had been told that I was responsible for an accreditation, and I was to have dinner with the mentor. And of course, my colleagues who were responding to that, the mentor's awful. He's absolutely awful. He doesn't understand anything. He hasn't got a clue what we're doing. We've really got to get rid of him, basically. And then I had dinner with the mentor, who was absolutely charming. And he said, oh God, your staff are terrible. They don't understand anything. So the problem was a question of communication. I think that my staff were quite nervous, so they weren't talking. And the mentor was probably also a little bit nervous because it was his first mentoring position. So please remember from the outset, work on creating a relationship with your mentor. It's very, very important. And a good mentor, as I said, will not come with lots of recipes. Victor has told you, basically the mentor is there to help you move along the educational chain. So the mentor will use the BGA criteria or the AACSB criteria or the EFMD, whatever the criteria are. We'll try and help you to better understand what's going on. As far as the BGA mentorship process is concerned, the specificities are very, very simple. We are here to support you and to encourage you. And I noticed within this workshop, there are a number of people who have worked with me in some of my mentoring duties. I hope that they would agree that I've tried to give them considerate support, but demanding support. So we provide support, we encourage development, and we bring in a window to the world. We bring in the international standards. I have done something like 250 accreditations throughout the world, but every school is different. Every school has its unique personality. And what the mentor does, or what the accreditors do, is they try and get behind the collective story. It really is a question of how you tell your story. And the mentor is a critical reader who will help you to tell your story. The mentor also provides advice, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. What are the challenges for, that most business schools face, and how can accreditors help you? That will be in the visit. As far as the BGA is concerned, if you move towards BGA accreditation, I think you have the choice. At some stage, you get a list of names, from what I remember, and you can choose. And some will even tell you, and it's a bit disappointing to know that sometimes you're only third on the list of choices. But because the other two weren't available, you get the job. It doesn't matter, though. It doesn't matter. I'm still happy to work as a mentor. And our job is basically there are 2 formal meetings a year. So that is what you get when you get a mentor. There are at least 2 formal meetings, either physically. Normally, before COVID, one of the meetings had to be a physical meeting. At the moment, that's no longer the case. I've had a number of formal meetings with the dean, with the head of accreditations, with the faculty, whoever the school decides, would benefit from chatting with me. Then we also have to give you 10 hours of support. I love that, 10 hours of support. That's emails, that's brief telephone conversations. And we write an annual report on your progress. So that's the first part of the mentoring. We also, obviously, at the end, it's the mentor who will support or not support your application. You have to draft a report to the BGA saying, yes, this is a school that has worked well. I think that their use of the SIM model, because it's the SIM model that's important, they have understood it. We have resolved any issues. I think that they can now go forward to a PRT visit. The objective is not to have a school have a PRT visit if you know they're not going to, if you think that the chances are they'd be relatively unsuccessful. So the role of the mentor is to protect the school from its own, at times, delusions and perhaps not always justified enthusiasm. But again, it's done with respect. So that is the first thing. And then, basically, what does a mentor do? So as I say, I've mentored for ACSB. I've done mentoring unofficially for Equus because they didn't have mentoring at that time. And I've done a few for the BGA, and I'm on the board, and I read lots of reports throughout the year. I'm on the different committees. So I think basically, the mentor is there to listen, to be a critical reader, a reviewer. Now, I like the idea of a story. In the documentation of BGA, the documentation says your report should be a good read, cohesive and readable. Well, I would go even further. Not only should your documentation be a good read, cohesive and readable, everything from the start to the finish, from the moment you start an accreditation, you should be saying, what are we trying to tell the world? How are we trying to tell it? So if you look at the idea of a story, in a story you have the themes of the story. So the school will identify the themes that it wants really to put forward, and those themes will be determined by the accreditation. So in BGA, responsible management, impact, ecosystem, whatever. Then they'll have the plot, how they work it. The plot is how the story moves forward. And that is the impact model with the input, outcome, output, and whatever. And then you've got the characters. Very important to have the characters. Who are you going to bring into the process? I've been into some schools as a mentor or as an accreditor, and I've met the dean once, and that's it. And you don't see the dean anymore because the dean has decided to delegate to the head of accreditation, which is not a problem if the head of accreditations has political access. But if the head of accreditation is put into a role as the technician of statistics or the writer, then that cannot be very positive for the school. You've got to have a clear collective approach. So I suppose I'd be really reinforcing the role of accreditors within a school. And the accreditation head is not just a technician who plays with numbers. And deans and directors, program directors need to know that. So I think the first one would be they review. The second role would be that they identify inconsistencies. If they're doing a critical review, well, they identify the inconsistencies. Are you, they look at the 9 points of the BGA Charter. They look at the 5 key accreditation criteria. I looked at the scene with the schools I've been mentoring. And we sit down and talk. Generally, the opening meeting will be And again, Victor's advice is very important. I have been into schools where even quite late on, it's clear that some people hadn't read the documentation. Quite clear. That the head of accreditation had, but that knowledge, that interpretation was not shared by other key people coming in. They basically, and I've done it when I was, head of, we've all done it. Yeah, well, I've got my accreditation head, they can do the work. Really, you need to have everyone involved, and people need to have read what is going on. And so I think that is important, that you really do need to know what the 9 points of the BGA Charter are, the 5 key accreditation criteria, your interpretation. It's your story, it's not BGA's story. They'll be applying the criteria, but they'll be applying the criteria to what you tell them or what we tell them, and the impact model. This is to disappoint some people, because this has been asked, what the poor mentor does not do, she does not read the SAF, well, she does not write it, SAF or the SAR. That's not their job, okay? So you don't ask them to write it for you, they can't do it. And I think also what Victor probably didn't mention, my understanding is that the mentor, which also you have to make sure you convince the mentor that you're good, because the mentor is also on the PRT visit on the panel, I think, unless it's changed. So, avoid being too aggressive or nasty with your poor mentor, even if you do think that, they're not very good. If they're not very good, assume your responsibility. And if they are very good, well, you can take all the praise. So that would be the first thing I'd say, that the role of the mentor is, the official one, that's fine. But really the role of the mentor is to bring enthusiasm, another look. As I say, when I go into a school, I don't come to say, oh, this is the way you should be doing it. No, I say, what do you want to do? Why are you doing that? Oh, okay, that convinces me. Well, not that statistic doesn't indicate that, you really are trying to do what you tell me you're doing. That doesn't work like that. I can think of an example that comes into my head. I went to one school recently, and they told me that their whole unique selling point was on the possibility for students to choose electives. They had a great elective choice. And I said, well, you only offer 3 electives. So that was a bit difficult. And then even worse, they had to choose the electives 18 months before the electives opened. So then when you start to scratch, you realize it's bureaucratic constraints. They weren't lying. They just hadn't seen that problem themselves. So often what block schools are, they're so used to the ecosystem that they don't see problems. And the mentor just comes in with enthusiasm, with energy, and listens. So that would be the first point that I would make. Familiarize yourself with the criteria. Be honest, because you can work through your problems. Get your documentation correct, and also your metrics. When the mentor comes in, I generally open with a formal meeting where I say to people, what do you expect from me? Okay, fine. Well, I can or I can't. And then I'll say, this is what I expect from you. Okay, we can do that or we can't. What are your problems? What do you think the problems will be to draft your documentation? Where do you think you are? Are you good or not good? I mean, what would you give yourself out of 10 at the moment? And schools would say, well, I think we're 8 or we're 5. Fine, let's work on that. And why do you think you're only 5 on 10? Oh, okay. And so we work on it. So that would be, for me, the role of a mentor, the official one. And in general, it would be a critical reviewer, bringing a window onto the world, bringing experience. As I say, I've 200 odd accreditations physically that I've done, plus about 300 reports that I've read throughout the world. So you have an idea, but you don't have an idea for everything, but you have a general, relatively relaxed attitude, and you can be open. So use your mentor, and you'll find that the mentors, they're not coming for the money. They're coming for the intellectual stimulation. They're coming to be maybe feel flattered, but they're not coming. They're coming to have a pleasant time, to learn things. So if you show them that you want to help them to learn things about your institution, then you will find that most mentors, and I've had mentors mentoring my schools, I've never regretted it. I don't think we've ever had a bad mentor. Because they're people who volunteer, they want to be useful, they want to discover other countries, whatever. Use it. Now, the second one I think was accreditation visits. Was that correct, Victor? Yeah, accreditation visits. how to make them successful, or what are the expectations for accreditation visits? Well, once again, an accreditation visit, the accreditation panel will have read all the documentation. Generally what happens, if I chair, generally what happens is, you know, people will come together beforehand and they'll talk, well, what do you think are the main strengths of this school? What do you think are the main weaknesses? What do you think are the main incoherencies? Fine, okay, how shall we plan the next day of questioning? Now, the reaction of the PRT will depend on the quality of what you do. And I think there are 3 stages. For those people who organize visits, we'll see if you agree. Obviously, there's the before the visit. So make sure it's, you know, fluid, that it's not complicated, that the accreditors are, you know, well received. I've done an accreditation recently, simple things, and we were put onto a link for, in theory, it was to see the programs, the classes that were being offered. But in fact, my email has been inundated with, how do I get my medical insurance? And I've been told that I have to do this for a visa. And, you know, some other panel members said to me, can you stop all this? It wasn't their fault, they hadn't anticipated. So always say to yourself, how can I make sure, how can I reassure the panel that we're good at organizing simple things like visits, hotels, whatever. The documentation. If the documentation says write a report of 20 pages, 90 pages, don't do 350 pages. Keep it simple. Talk your language. Obviously, there's a language of accreditation. Obviously, like there's a language of economics. But you know, the worst type of report is when you say, "Ah, this is like somebody's just downloaded this from Wikipedia. It's just pure accreditation language." You keep it simple. But every time you make a statement, every time you use a verb like, you know, verb of we're trying, we hope, give facts, so that there's always a reassuring progress in the report. So the documentation is very important that you send off. The next one that is really extremely important is the base room. The base room has got to, you know, look at the criteria. There are clear guidances on what you can and should put in the base room. Well, the number of schools, even the best schools, who still do not look and fully furnish their base room is quite remarkable. And they're always surprised. Often it's the very best schools because they think, oh, we don't need to. But you do need to, because, you know, the PRT are coming in for a day and a half. They want to read everything. Personally, what I do before any visit, no matter what the visit, I go on the websites. I look at the websites. I look at the competitors. So I have an idea of what's going on. Because again, I'm trying to help the school. So I would say before documentation, make sure your SAF and SAR, whatever, respect the guidelines and are well written. And I would suggest before you send them off, because, and I've done it as a project manager, we panic. We always send things off at the last minute. All of us do that. If you can, when you do your retro planning, add a week on. Just try and give yourself a week's breathing space and give your report to 2 people who know nothing about what you're doing, or 2 academics in your department who are not particularly involved, and say, does this convince you? Do you think it's good? Is it well written? And see what they tell you. So you've got the documentation, the base room, and I think the other thing which is very important, your stakeholders. Get them involved even from the beginning. On quite a number of occasions, I've been to schools. Okay, now it may be calendars. You go to schools and, you know, they tell you that they've got the best alumni relationship in the world, or the best relationship with employers in the world. And you go, and for the session which involves employers, there's only 1 employer or 2. And you think, well, this is a bit strange. They've told me that they've got the best, you know, and then when you ask, you say, oh, well, we didn't think of contacting them before. Get your stakeholders involved very early on. They know that, you know, the dates are coming up and what's going to happen, so they can bring them in. Then you've got, during the meeting, what we're expecting. Well, we go back to the idea of storytelling. You know, it's staff your meeting, the characters in the plot. So the plot is you're going to try and convince the PRT that what you're telling us is happening, that you're developing the mission, the vision, the strategy, and you're moving along. And at the end of every session, you want to make sure that the message is getting through. But you don't want people to recite by heart. You do want people who are aware. Again, you go into some sessions and people haven't read the documentation and they're not too sure of what's going on. So make sure that the people are involved. Not everyone will want to read the 90 pages of it. Give them a brief resume, give them a brief. These are the key points of the chapter of what we're saying about our alumni. These are the key points of what we're saying about our curriculum. These are the 3 key points that we're saying about our mission, so that they know, and then they can build on that. I think it's also important during the meeting, and that's often, and honestly, most project leaders, most accreditation leaders do it extremely well, be reactive. Why? Because there is never, we always find things to ask for, always. Whether it be a budget, whether it be a document, whether it be the minutes of meetings, you can guarantee that the PRT will always ask for extra documentation. And the good schools can bring that extra documentation within an hour. Classic, for example, you need to see projects, student projects, and they're not there. And then schools, oh, we can't show you them. Well, they should have identified that from the beginning and said, legislation in our country do not allow us to, okay, then we know. When you arrive and you say, you haven't given us any documentation. So it's very important to be reactive. I would also, anticipate, and that was the one I said, anticipate your questions, the questions. What do you think they're going to ask us? And if you ask these 2 other people, or you yourself say, okay, we've done a good job, we've written the report, but, if we were reading it for the first time, where would we not be convinced? So you try and anticipate where the questions are. Because sometimes you ask a question and you can see that there's total, not panic, but why did they ask us this question? And the schools, and I did it when I was responsible, I brought in colleagues a week or so before, and we did a mock accreditation. That could be worthwhile. And then, so that's the beginning, during, and then after. Okay, afterwards, if it's less, it's after the visit, there will be all sorts of things that you need to do, checking the report, if there are any conditions and whatever. So those would be, for me, how to make them successful is to well organize the before, the during, and the after. Now, I think the other one is, why bring in accreditors? Well, I think the role of accreditation is to give you visibility and credibility or legitimacy. There's so much information now, so much information, that having an accreditation, an international accreditation, certainly has helped me in my career every single time. When I went for Equus, when I went for Amber, and Amber in particular was extremely useful. So, Equus, Amber, ACSD, I have never had any regrets because they've always helped us, A, to get visibility and legitimacy on the market, and B, to clarify what we were doing, to make sure that our passion, that our discourse was convincing, because you are forced to actually sell it with more precision and to be, questioned. So that would be, for me, very, very important. And of course, they also indicate clear quality musts. You say to a school, what do you think are, the future quality musts for alumni? And some schools don't know. Well, we can bring in that. Well, we can say, in these schools, extra schools, this is what they're doing in alumni relations. This is what they're doing in the curriculum. This is what they're doing with faculty management. Or so we can help you. And that is important without giving recipes. I always say to my panel members, we're not there to talk about our schools. We're there to listen to them and to briefly evoke and put in the report suggestions for recommendation. So accreditation visits, how to make them successful. I think that is important. Then we have the role of assessors. Basically you have 3 or 4 people, deans, program directors, and they just come in and they will listen. They will have read everything. They will have looked at the different criteria, and they will be going through it. So every session, will be focused. What are the challenges for business schools? Now, I have to stand up now because I have a psychotic cat who wants to go out. As we say, it's a live show. Things can go wrong, and it just went wrong, but never mind. Challenges for business schools. This was the difficult one for me. I said to Victor, well, challenges for business schools. I'll do it in 2 parts. Challenges for business schools, there are internal challenges, what I see coming up, the doubts. Challenges, well, internal challenges, what is the type of autonomy that business schools should have within a university? That's a classic one that comes up for me, the internal problems. power structure, who controls the programs, is it the faculty, is it the program director? All these things are challenges that I see regularly in schools. And the visit of accreditors can bring those problems out. Sometimes they're not explicit, but you see where the problem is. And then I think there are other general challenges, external. Well, I think one of the big challenges for the future, and I'm going to come to the second part in a minute, classic problems, but for me, a huge challenge for business schools in the future will be the whole question of responsible management. You know, what exactly does this mean? I mean, we're all used to this, you know, what we call either greenwashing or ethics washing. I mean, I listened to an advert the other day, and it was, we'll create responsible ballpoint pens. And I'm thinking, well, what's a responsible ballpoint pen? I mean, the word has been so overused. So what I would like, you know, I think that schools should be doing is really, if you're going to position yourself in terms of responsible management, get your act together. It's not just putting bits of corporate social responsibility or bits of ethics in different programs. It's really, what does it mean for you as a school to, you know, teach responsible management? Is it politics? Is it about economic justice? Is it about gender diversity? Is it about animal rights? Is it about global warming? Whatever. I think that is going to be a problem. And I think it's a problem because when you read the press, schools don't necessarily see it. But when you read the press, you can see that business schools are being increasingly criticized. And one of the reasons is, of course, is that, again, we see it, you know, let's be quite sort of, you know, we'll be secretive about it. But often in business schools, the economics faculty will say, it's not a real school, it's not a real university business school. You know, we have this intellectual problem. How can we compete internally to be treated as a serious university institution? And I think a serious university institution trains people, but it's not just a training school. So for me, one of the challenges in general business schools would be the whole question of what we understand by responsibility and credibility. In the future, given what we're seeing as problems for society, for the planet, what will be the role of business schools as compared to political science schools, as compared to philosophy schools? And how can we bring in that sort of humanist approach whilst training good managers? So don't get me wrong, I'm not, you know, that's just a macro concept. Now, I'd like to answer the question as well, because I think this is what Victor was more after. What are the classic challenges that we see when we go into a school and when we talk to schools? Well, I think some of the classic ones, the links between the mission statement and the vision and the values and the strategy. You know, you can go into a school and you've got a great SWOT analysis, and then when you play and you try and link the strategy that they've given you in another document, you think, well, what was the link to the SWOT analysis? So, you know, it's again, if you've got a SWOT analysis, make sure that your strategic plan addresses the questions you've raised in the SWOT analysis. Doesn't always happen. You know, if you say that, you know, if you say, for example, that our mission is to create global citizens, you know, or, you know, I'm thinking of some of the sort of schools here in France, invent your future. That's a great slogan for a business school, invent your future. Well, if your mission statement is invent your future or to train global citizens, you would expect the curriculum to reflect that. You know, either innovation, creativity, intercultural, whatever. And you often go into schools and you've got this fabulous strapline and you don't find it in the curriculum. So I think in general, it's one problem is how to align mission statement and vision with what you're doing, whether it be strategy or whether it be curriculum. Another classic problem that we see, and sometimes it's understandable, is a misunderstanding of the market. Schools will tell you, well, we've got weak recruitment, and you say to them, yeah, you've only, you know, your numbers are dropping, and they'll say, well, yeah, but it's just, you know, they'll have some vague, and you say, well, who are your competitors? And they'll say, oh, well, we don't have any. And I know they do. I've been on their website and I've looked around, and so again, a weak understanding of the market. You know, you need to look at analyzing who you are on the market. It's not always easy. And, you know, this is a question of, it's often a key issue, this distinctiveness. What does it mean to be distinctive? Well, I'm talking to you from France. Now, you know, I've been in France for 30 years. The rankings have never changed. Never. No matter what the marketing people of the business schools do, rankings rarely change. But that hasn't stopped the French business schools from trying to identify distinctiveness, because the students will, you know, they will react, not so much for the main cash cow program, but for the specialized masters. You have to think a little bit, how can you present yourselves and make yourselves attractive to students? So that would be the second issue, misunderstanding of the market. The other classic issue that comes up a lot, which does cause problems, is the whole question of assessment of students. How to define master level. This is often evacuated in peer review team discussions. You don't always get convincing answers. Or they'll say, well, it's master level because the Minister for Education tells us it's master level. So you say, well, what are the criteria? Just try and explain what you understand by master level, learning. Faculty is an issue at times. Gender diversity in particular, international diversity in particular. These are issues. These are key issues. Gender diversity, international diversity. Lots of schools now, they're using the AACSB, the scholarly academic. Okay, fine. Why not? You don't necessarily have to for BGA, but if you use it, explain why. So, what is your faculty? How would you currently describe your faculty? I always open with that question. What are the strengths and weaknesses of your faculty? Again, we're going back to this idea of storytelling. I always think it's every chapter you say, where are we? Are we good? Are we bad? Where are two strengths, two weaknesses? And at the end of my chapter, will I have demonstrated that my two strengths will have been reinforced and my weaknesses will have been lessened? I think the other one would be the curriculum is clearly an issue. Curriculum development is clearly an issue. We go into many schools, excellent schools, fabulous reputation, magnificent placements, superb careers, nothing wrong with the schools. Perfect. In the sense, academic quality, professional links, no worries. Except the program looks dated. It looks old. Or it looks like a catalogue of individual independent classes, all excellent, taught by the best researchers. Then you go and see the students and you say, yeah, but we didn't see many links, or we didn't have an induction week, or we didn't. So the curriculum, I think, most schools or many schools would benefit from trying to see how their curriculum is integrated, how their curriculum is a general transformational journey. I like this idea. Some people laugh, but it's pretty good. That it's not just we choose courses and at the end we've been, good in accountancy, it's how do all of these courses contribute to your mission? And that I really would encourage schools. And again, schools don't do that much benchmarking. See what's going on in the world. What is it? How would you define a contemporary curriculum? Or if, for example, curriculum, if you say our school is really obsessed with personal development, and then you look at the school's program and the first 2 semesters, you've got accountancy 1, accountancy 2, finance 1, finance 2, econometrics 1, econometrics 2, and you say, well, where's the personal development? So make sure that your curriculum reflects what you claim you're trying to do. And I find that could be. And I think the other issue which I find always quite amusing in a pleasant sense is most schools will give a SWOT analysis. In fact, all schools do. Despite the fact that my strategy faculty tell me that SWOT is dead, it has been, it's gone. But I don't know whether it is. I'm not a strategist, and I'm quite happy to read a SWOT report because it's readable, it's simple for somebody like me, But what I do find is schools use models for strategy, but very few use models for example, internationalization. There are lots of models on the market. When I say to somebody, what do you understand by internationalization? Often there's silence. Well, it's the number of study trips, or it's the number of foreign students we have coming in. And I say, well, there are other models which give you other criteria to map out, the global footprint, as we call it. Similarly with service, service quality. How can you judge what what's it called, the model on service quality? I can't remember, ServQual. It would be quite nice if schools started to look at other models to assess other parts of their activities. So those would be the challenges that I find classically come up when we go into schools. In fact, that's where I find the PRT can help a little bit. And what my final message would be, we're here to help. The mentors are here to help. And the PRT teams are here to help. We're not here to sort of earn points and be seen as being wise or more experienced. Far from it. We're here, A, to learn from you, and B, to help you improve. That's it, Victor.
Thank you. Thank you, Philip and Victor. That was great. We've had loads of questions coming in. So I'm going to go to the questions because I'm a bit conscious on time and we've got a lot of them coming in. So the first question is, I've sort of reworded it because a lot of people have sort of been asking the same question. So I've sort of put it all into one. So the question is, we have our re-accreditation visit in 2021. Is it possible to apply for BGA accreditation now? And how long does it take for the process to become BGA accredited?
I assume this is for AMBA accredited schools that are asking this, just to confirm?
Yes, sorry about that, Victor.
Yeah. So if you have more than 6 months, you can, if you have your accreditation coming in 2021. And what's nice about the joint accreditation process is it is quite streamlined. Mark Stoddard, the director of accreditation, had a presentation on this just yesterday, I believe. But basically, it's a more streamlined process involving fewer documents and also, of course, fewer fees because everything is planned into one assessment visit. So yes, if you have like around a 6-month period, because you're probably going to need it, you can probably start the joint accreditation process.
Perfect, thank you. We've got loads of questions coming in. So you might have mentioned this earlier, but they've joined a little bit late, so I thought I'd just put forward the question again so they can just pick up on what you said earlier. So they're asking if you could explain in more detail the difference between validation versus accreditation.
Right. So we didn't cover validation in this presentation, but the way to think of validation is an intermediary step to achieving accreditation. It's not a mandatory step, so it's not something schools have to do, but it's usually really nice for schools that perhaps have never undergone an international accreditation before, or perhaps feel that the full accreditation is perhaps a bit too daunting at the moment. But validation is essentially a shorter process. It's a 6-month let's say process rather than, let's say, an 18-month process or more like BGA is. And what you expect in validation is we don't have an assessment visit and we don't have like a mentorship process. Instead, during those 6 months, schools are asked to address the BGA charter principles through a portfolio of evidence. So it uses many of the documentation or similar documentation that we would use in the accreditation process that gets schools to understand, how to draft the reports, how to submit their data, how to draft everything into a coherent story, as has been mentioned several times from me and Philip, and get familiar for that process. And if a school can really convince the accreditation board that they meet the essence of each principle through facts and documentation and data, they are awarded validation status. So think of it as like a step that schools can go for in case accreditation seems a bit too daunting, or if an international accreditation is not a familiar process just yet. So hopefully that answers the question.
Lovely, thank you, Victor. So we've got loads more questions coming in. So this one might be for the both of you. So it's at what point in the relationship with BGA is the mentor appointed? When a business school becomes a member or when it applies for accreditation?
It's when it becomes, when it starts accreditation during the development stage. So that's the second stage of the accreditation process.
Thank you. Loads of questions coming in now. This has sort of been a question which has been coming in quite a lot from people, so I'm just going to rephrase it into a shorter question. So they're asking if it's possible to review more than one program.
We in the BGA accreditation process, we review 2 sample programs. So as was mentioned earlier, it typically will be, if the school has postgraduate and undergraduate programs, it'll be one of each. And if you have, say, like 2 master's programs in your business school, we'll try to pick 2 that are as different from each other as possible. But it will be 2 programs that we'll look at in detail.
Thank you. So I think this is a question for Philip. What are some suggestions to creating a really good base room for assessors?
Well, basically, the documentation that should be provided, there's a clear list provided by BGA, which details every single document. So you basically have a checklist. And you know, what we found is if this checklist is followed, then the base room is a good one. And you take every single step, whether the documentation linked to faculty, the documentation linked to strategy, you take each of the key criteria, and unless I'm mistaken, there is a checklist which indicates the document, the proof that needs to be put into the base room to enable the PRT to judge what Victor referred to, you know, to judge that the claims, the affirmations are embedded in reality.
Thank you. Perfect.
I could just add on top of that, we have, it's a document I didn't mention in this presentation, but we have like a base room guidance that, you know, schools can receive prior to the accreditation visit. This includes that checklist. So everything that we'd like to see during the visit will be included there.
Thank you. Perfect. So another question, schools can be members of BGA. Can students and graduates be members of BGA as well?
Yes, that's true. So basically what we have is a free membership model for students. So if a school becomes a BGA member, your students receive access to BGA as well. And it's a free, let's say a free membership for them with a lot of career development tools, CV builders, how to write cover letters. We do interview preparations. So there's a lot of good content. We have a membership manager. Her name is Rachel. So if you'd like to get in touch with her, just let me know, and I'll be happy to do so. But she's really great at that and explaining the process.
Thank you very much. So this might be another question for you, Philip. It's asking, how involved can we expect mentors to be in the development stage?
Well, the development stage, the mentor is not involved in the development stage. You know, if by development we mean the part that the period where there's the implementation. Victor, is that correct?
Oh no, they mean the step where you're helping them with a continuous impact model.
Oh, well, as you know, no, I mean that depends. As I said, there's a minimum service that you know the BGA tells us to do, and that would be 2 minimum formal meetings plus 10 hours of input plus the writing of an annual report. But that is more to protect the interests of the schools. That is to say, you know, if you take on this responsibility, you have to understand that when you're planning your own other activities, you've got to be able to offer that to the school. You're not, you know, you can't turn around and say, I haven't got any time to do the mentoring. So I think schools can expect a lot of involvement. Certainly, you know, the schools I have mentored have been available. I'm happy to take calls. I'm happy to read material. I've even translated. I mean, it all depends on the relationship. If you have people who are clearly enthusiastic and are clearly, you know, pleasant to you, that it's a pleasure to have them on the line, I mean, that does help, then you'll find that mentors give a lot. But the minimum service to protect the interests of schools is that mentors commit themselves to these 2 meetings, at least formal meetings, one of which is to the school, 10 hours of support, plus the writing of an annual report. You know, so you know, the schools know what they're going to get in minimum terms. But honestly, you know, mentors generally give more. I mean, I think I give more. People give more.
Thank you. So this might be a question for you, Victor. They're asking, what are impact trailblazers?
Yes, this is a service that we offer business school members. So if you have faculty that have published a piece of research that's you perhaps want a little bit more focus on, or you want to promote it a bit, perhaps it deals with topics on sustainability, for instance. We had a lot of those. Basically, what we can do there is promote it via webinar. So this is essentially a platform that we use where faculty of your school can come on board, and what they do is they basically host a webinar around their piece of research, and then we promote that to the rest of the AMBA and BGA network, which anyone can watch at any time. It's just to get a little bit more thought-provoking discussions and promote some research that that's trying to really address some serious issues, especially within the areas of sustainability and how business can tackle those areas. And we have this on our website as well. So if you head over that, you can read or you can watch some of the previous ones that we've done, for instance, with Aston Business School and Imperial College and so forth.
Thank you very much. So another question, I think it might be suitable for you, Victor. They're asking, how does BGA measure continuous impact and what does good look like?
Right, so basically the measurement is based on using the continuous impact model, the impact metrics that the school has to create. So remember that framework I brought up a bit earlier on, where we looked at, say, the input and going all the way through what we do with that input through an activity. Basically, what we want to see is that if you have a certain objective at the school that you really want to achieve, basically we want to see is what are you doing to meet that objective. So using this impact model, we want to see, okay, so what kind of spending, for instance, did you do to meet this objective? What kind of actions did you take with that spending? Did you see any direct tangible results from that? And have you measured what that result ended up resulting into? So for instance, remember that example I brought up about entrepreneurship and training students to become entrepreneurs? Basically, we want to see there is, well, if your school's objective is to be like the leading business school for creating entrepreneurs in your region, well then, okay, at the end of the day, we want to see how many of your students are actually starting up a business. And so that's one way of looking at it. But that doesn't give us the full story. So how many start up a business, and then we track it back to what the input is and the activity. So what can you do different with your, say, your funds to support your students to, once they graduate, to start a business? Does that involve more incubation programs and so forth? Does that mean like more mentorship from, like, say, like people who have been entrepreneurs or are entrepreneurs who can work with the students directly? It's a way for us, a mechanism for us and for the school, I mean, primarily for the school, to see, okay, are we actually meeting our objectives here? And to many surprise, sometimes they're not. So the impact model is really there to serve as the purpose of, are we meeting it? And secondly, what can we do to improve in the areas that we're not doing so well? Then secondly, what is considered good? Well, what is considered good is if there's a positive trend. So are we seeing, let's say, more and more, for this example, going back to that again, are we seeing more people who can start up businesses? Is the school gaining more recognition for this in its market? And if that's the case, well, then the school has, let's say, a positive trend. Now, I should be clear, not all impact metrics the school creates will be positive, and that won't necessarily mean that the school can proceed to the assessment stage. But there might be like external factors affecting the school's ability to meet those objectives, and that's understandable, but the school has to, of course, provide a narrative to why this is happening, and they have to provide their understanding as well, that they're fully aware of what's happening. If these are external factors, or perhaps something within the school itself, internal factors, has prevented the school from meeting one of its objectives. So having that, let's say, awareness and being conscious of what's happening at the school on all levels, as Philip mentioned, a lot of schools are kind of so into this bubble of theirs, or how they've been operating, that they don't really see the full picture around them and what's happening around them. So hopefully that answers the question.
Can I come in there?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, just to say, yeah, and I think what's important, we're talking about continuous improvement. So even if the criteria demonstrates something in inverted commas negative, the next stage will be, what will be the strategic response, this idea of a loop. So the school says, oh, well, we're a bit negative there. We're not actually achieving what we wanted to do. So the mentor will probably, before the visit, will say, well, can you identify? What I generally do is I say, okay, let's imagine it's 3 or 5 years. I'm always an optimist. So I say, well, what can you do over the next 3 years to rectify that, to turn that into something positive? So it's always used as a trampoline to something else. It's very important to say that. Being negative isn't necessarily in itself, detrimental to the accreditation request. But the school would need then to show that they're aware and that they will close the loop and do something positive.
Thank you. So another question, is it possible to begin the accreditation process before becoming a member school?
No. So in the eligibility criteria, we say that a school has to be a full member of BGA prior to beginning the accreditation process. So that's one of the eligibility criteria.
Thank you. So this question's been coming in quite a lot, so I'm just going to rephrase it. It's around online programs. So it's saying, are online programs considered, or is that an issue?
Online programs are definitely considered, absolutely. And in fact, we have a couple of schools in the network who are online only business schools. Again, we want to see the outcome. We want to see the impact. So we're not too concerned about that. But of course, if it's online, the school has to prove that it's offering an experience that's perhaps equitable or close to what a physical experience would be like, or perhaps something that's very different from a physical experience that adds tremendous value to, say, the student's journey of whatever they're trying to learn. So of course, online programs or online schools, no problem.
And I think if I could, that question is a very good one, because it reminded me, I had it in my notes, but I forgot. I think the other challenge for schools at the moment, and thank you for the question, is COVID-19 is, being very disruptive. It's not only our online programs, they're not an issue. Well, they're not an issue in the sense that the question asked it, but they are an issue because I think that, online education will be a strategic challenge for all schools in the future. So any accreditation agency unable to sort of look at them and assess them is doomed to failure.
Thank you. So another question, this has been a question which has come in twice. So I'm just going to put it into one so we can cover both sides. So it's, our school is not accredited by AMBA nor BGA at the moment, and we're in pursuit of more international accreditations. How do I know what approach is right for us?
Right. So one thing to be aware of, let's say AMBA and BGA are your two considerations at this point. One thing to be aware of, that AMBA currently has imposed a limit of the amount of accredited schools. We have a 300 business school limit, and this was in place to kind of maintain the exclusivity of the AMBA accredited network. So there are 300 business schools that are going to have their MBAs accredited, and at the moment, we don't have 300 schools accredited, but we have schools that are in the process of becoming accredited. So that 300 limit has practically been met. And then we have an even further list of schools that are trying to get in. So if you're trying to apply for AMBA accreditation now, it might be a bit difficult, and you may have to wait quite a while. And even then, it's not a guarantee, because you have to meet all the eligibility criteria, and you have to go through like the whole discussion with the accreditation director. Now, if you want BGA accreditation, this is an institutional accreditation, and a lot of the aspects, from the mentorship to the assessment visit to the documentation and so forth, all that is in the BGA accreditation process. But the focus, of course, is different, because we're looking at the full institution, and we're looking at undergraduate programs as well, and other master's programs, not just the MBA. So and another thing to consider is that, let's say you go for BGA accreditation and then eventually can prove that your MBA is of like really good quality. There is a chance that you could do a joint accreditation in the future of AMBA and BGA. Again, this is not guaranteed, and we can't guarantee that, but assuming that you meet all the criteria and your MBA is very strong, and your institution is very strong, you could go for a joint accreditation.
Thank you. So another, I think it might be another question for you, Victor. Do you plan to limit the number of schools in the BGA network in the same way you are limiting AMBA?
It's an interesting question. We haven't come to a final decision with regards to that. There are two thoughts here, basically. One is that, okay, we want to keep it like an exclusive network, and really, if a school has the BGA accreditation, that's fantastic, and that's a recognized label and so forth. But then there's also the other side, where our objective is to be, or one of our missions basically is to be the leading body or so forth for impact, responsible management, and lifelong learning. That's what we want to do. And you can't really do that if you limit the network in any way. Now with AMBA that works, and because it's program specific and because the mission is slightly different, it's to recognize the best MBAs, that works to limit. But with BGA, because our vision and mission is really to impact business education as a whole around the world. And many of you probably in the audience recognize this, that business education it's quite lame in a lot of areas. It's the same cookie cutter courses. There's very little focus on, say, the negotiation, sales part. There's very little buildup of character. If you look at most business schools, this is the case. And what we want to do is we want to come in and we want to change that. That's one of our key or prime motivators, because there's so much room for improvement, and especially in the areas of responsible management, where, as Philip mentioned, it's not enough to just mention that, yeah, here are the corporate ethics and so forth. No, go further, go beyond that. And the whole idea behind BGA using the continuous impact model is to push schools even further and really make them work and think about the various aspects it can do to improve. And we think that at the end of the day, we can really make an impact here. So at the moment, probably not, but again, we don't know. But it's not something we have really discussed in immense detail. But there's about 138 business schools currently in BGA, and a lot of those are undergoing the accreditation process as we speak. So the network has grown considerably in just less than 2 years, actually.
Thank you. So I've got a question. Can you talk a little bit more about the dynamics of the panel who would visit us for BGA accreditation and how the visit would be? And it sort of carries on. So would the panel, who would be in the panel, and would it feel a little bit similar to AACSB accreditation?
Philip, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I've done ACSB accreditation. I mean, there's always an underlying similarity. What differs is that, the panel coming in for BGA or for ACSB will be looking at the criteria of those institutions. But generally speaking, you will find that there are similar issues and differences. BGA is not obsessed with the ACSB model of scholarly academics, etc., and there are differences. But generally speaking, the PRT, the ones I've been on, whether it be for Equus, ACSB, BGA, or AMBA, you have a chairperson, and the role of the chairperson will be to ensure that the timekeeping is appropriately handled, that the questions are asked in a challenging but respectful way, that the general atmosphere is not an atmosphere of confrontation, that respect is shown. So, this is the basic philosophy. You'll always have the dean, program directors, director of international relations, whatever. There's a mix of on the sort of hierarchy chain and on the experience chain. But what I've found is that the differences are more at the criteria level, and in terms of philosophy, I think that you'll find a similar approach, a similar caring approach. Perhaps I would say that sometimes the BGA and AMBA, I found them clear. I'm not going to sort of criticize other institutions, and I think that the reports are slightly different, probably a little bit denser than other institutions. But that the PRT visit is going to be, I think, for most accreditation agencies, an exercise in respectful, critical analysis. That's how I would characterize them. I don't think I've ever been on a panel where there have been major issues, tensions, and I've never been visited by a panel where there have been major issues or tensions. It can happen, but the chair will generally keep that under control.
Thank you. So I think we've got time for one more question. We've had loads of questions come in. So obviously, like what I said earlier, we'll put them to Victor and he'll get in touch afterwards. So the last question is, what do you mean by degree awarding? Is a private business school highly recognized by the market, but missing ministerial accreditation eligible? And we've had a sort of another question which can go on the back of this is, does BGA accredit business schools which offer only postgraduate programs? I don't know if Victor, if you'd like to take that one.
Well, the accrediting of postgrad, yeah, it could be a business school that offers only postgraduate programs. It could be a business school that offers only undergraduate programs. So long as the school is very clear on what it's trying to offer and that it's offering a business education, yeah, for sure, absolutely. As for degree awarding powers, this is basically some sort of like the school has the formal, let's say, powers to award degrees. In its given nation or region or wherever it is. And this is usually a formal document that you can show to us. If there's a Ministry of Education or so forth that has confirmed that you have that power to award the degrees. So that usually can be submitted to us and it shouldn't be a problem.
Thank you, perfect. So just for everyone, just keep typing in your questions. We'll put them forward to Victor following the session. So I'd just like to thank Victor and Philip for an excellent session. A lot of great answers to the questions which have come in. A lot of great information during the session. But unfortunately, we've ran out of time. So I'd just like to let everyone know that this session is recorded and we'll send through the recording next week. So you will receive an email from Amber and BGA with details on how you can access the recording and you can listen to this session over again. So just before we go, I'd like to thank you who's joined us. Such a great session. Thank you, Victor and Philip, again. And we look forward to seeing you on an Amber and BGA webinar in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.